it's time to refit the coolant reservoir tank. So this was really disgusting on the inside, and I had to use a coat hanger kind of bent at an angle to clean out some of the sludge that had built up in here. It was just green, it almost was like green clay. And after rinsing it out thoroughly, it is now clean on the inside, ready to accept the new pink coolant. So this is a kind of a bear to get in and out. It fits perfectly in the V of the engine, and hoses wrap around it. So I'm not really looking forward to stuffing this back in, but gotta do it. Since I've got the battery taken out and all of this wiring basically disconnected from the bike and free hanging, I think this is a perfect time to swap out the battery cables for the Moto Electric upgrade kit. So for example, look at the thickness of this lead that goes to the battery terminals. They're pretty thin. The gauge of wires it looks adequate, but I mean, supposedly this is under spec for this engine, because this engine, I mean, with the thick oil that it has, high compression pistons, it takes a lot of juice to turn this thing over, and I guess the weak link are the battery cables. So over here is the Moto Electric upgraded cable kit. You can see these are copper wires, much thicker. The wires themselves are far thicker than stock, and this should help with the slow cranks that this engine has. If this does end up making it crank like a normal bike, then I might think about putting this on my Multistrada as well. Those are the cables installed, and I didn't know this, but you actually keep the old cables in place. You just disconnect a couple spots, but you slip them over the top of the new cables and you bolt them up to the battery like that. So interesting design. I wasn't expecting that. Now I'm going to go through and change all the fluids on the bike, meaning the clutch fluid, the rear brake fluid, and the engine oil. I am not going to get this on video because it's pretty straightforward, and we saw it all when I did the Multistrada. All right, so that's all the fluids changed out. Everything except for the front brake fluid, because I'm really gonna wait until I get the front wheel put back on. But otherwise, fresh oil, coolant, rear brake fluid is all good to go. And this bike's really starting to shape up and looking like something. Now it's time to put the airbox back on and hook up the fuel injection. This is gonna be not super straightforward because you gotta line up 2 intake boots at once, as well as making sure you don't accidentally cover up wires and hoses that need to be connected. So the next thing we're going to do is set the correct fork height in the clamps. Right now the fork legs are set too low in the clamps, and we really have to set this before we put any body work on, or else you won't be able to get to the clamp bolts. So the stock setting is 243 millimeters from the top of the fork tube to the top of this bottom triple clamp. And I've already measured here with my caliper 150 millimeters down, and I use this as my next reference point because my caliper is not big enough to actually span 243 millimeters. So I've measured from that point to the top of the clamp, and I've come up with 239 millimeters, which means we need to move this fork leg up. So I've moved it up to this second line on the top of the fork leg, but that only gets us to 240 millimeters. So I still have to move it up 3 more millimeters. All right, so there we are. That's 243 millimeters, and you can see we've almost made it to the 3rd line at the top of that fork leg. So that's much more accurate of a setting. If we go see the other fork leg, it's sitting at about 1.5 lines. So quite a big difference. All right, so now that I've got that set, all I need to do is tighten these clamps up and then do the exact same thing on the other side. The next thing to install is the air filter and air intake tubes. Now, remember when I pulled the air intake tubes off, they had this little rubber gasket that went around the perimeter, and it had failed and it let a bunch of dirt into the airbox. Well, I've decided that I'm not going to reuse that original design, and I've taken some of this toolbox drawer liner type stuff and cut it out and laid it on the perimeter to create sort of rubbery gasket that seals a much larger surface. After doing some research, I found that there is no perfect solution for these inlet tubes as long as you're using the original style air filter. If you upgrade to an MRW style little pod filter that seals up against here, you do get a much better seal. But I think this will work, especially for the amount of money it cost, about 10 bucks in material. I also made some cutouts to seal up against the side of the air filter a little bit better, because you can see that the side of the air filter was letting some dust and dirt in as well. So just the whole assembly is flawed. So hopefully these little gaskets that I've made will seal it up far better than it was straight from the factory. I've also pre-drilled some holes in there so that the screws can slip right on through. You can see I've RTV'd these to the air inlet tubes, and that's just so that they stay in place when I put up the tubes to the airbox. Otherwise, you just would never get them to stay in place. So we'll give this a shot. It'll definitely be better than where we started.